Elias was a creature of habit, and his tiny, book-lined apartment was his carefully ordered universe. The only variable in his meticulously planned days was Alistair. Alistair was a cat of impossible black, a void that swallowed light, save for the occasional eerie gleam of his mismatched eyes. One a pale, milky amber, the other a shocking crystalline blue. Elias had found him 6 months ago, huddled beneath a shuttered antique shop during a thunderstorm. The cat hadn't been out. He had simply walked out of the shadows, shaken himself dry, and taken up residence on Elias's most comfortable armchair. An act of possession that had never been rescinded. Elias often mused that Alistair didn't live in the apartment so much as he presided over it. The cat moved not with feline grace, but with an unnerving, deliberate flow, silent as falling snow. He never chased dust motes or battered at trees. Instead, he would sit for hours on the windowsill, his gaze fixed on things Elias couldn't see, sometimes letting out a low, resonant purr that seemed to vibrate the very glass. The true mystery, however, lay not in Alistair's appearance or demeanor, but in the peculiar timing of his actions. Whenever Elias was faced with a significant decision, a career change, a difficult conversation, or even just which path to take home, Alistair would appear. The cat would jump onto Elias's desk and push a single, specific book off the stack. Without fail, the page the book fell open to would contain a phrase or passage that spoke directly to Elias's quandary, offering a cryptic yet accurate piece of guidance. It was this unnerving, silent partnership that made Elias wonder. Was Alistair just a cat, or something far older? Perhaps a guardian waiting for the moment when Elias would truly need his peculiar brand of counsel? The silent black cat, with his mismatched eyes, was the only untidy, unknowable variable in Elias's predictable life, and he wouldn't have it any other way. The quiet life Elias cherished began to unravel with the arrival of a sleek, cream-colored envelope bearing no return address and sealed with antique crimson wax. Inside was an invitation to an exclusive, highly competitive architectural competition, a chance to design a revitalization project for a historical city district. It was an opportunity that could launch his career into the stratosphere. A dream realized, but the stakes were immense, and the pressure was immediate. Elias felt the familiar, anxious knot tightening in his chest. He placed the invitation on his coffee table, walking circuits around the small living room, the weight of the decision paralyzing him. He desperately wanted this, but the fear of failure felt just as large as the potential reward. That evening, as the city lights began to twinkle outside his window, Alistair padded into the room. He didn't jump onto the windowsill as usual. Instead, he moved directly toward the overflowing bookshelf near the television. With an unnerving deliberation, the cat stood on his hind legs, paws batting at the spine of a heavy, leather-bound volume Elias had inherited from his grandfather but never opened. Myths and Legends of the Silk Road. Elias watched, frozen in place, as Alistair pushed the book over the edge. It landed on the thick wool rug with a dull thud. Elias walked over slowly, his heart hammering in his chest, and picked it up. The book had fallen open to a section titled, "The Weaver's Predicament." The text detailed an ancient tale of a young artisan in Samarkand who was offered the chance to weave a tapestry for the emperor himself, but only if he used magical, ever-shifting threads that could easily unravel his entire work. Elias read the final lines aloud in a whisper. Fortune favors the bold artisan, not the one whose loom sits idle for fear of a misplaced thread. He looked up from the book to find Alistair sitting patiently on the coffee table, directly beside the invitation. The cat raised one black paw and gently tapped the crimson wax seal, his mismatched eyes fixed on Elias with an unnerving, knowing intensity. The message was clear. Elias picked up his drafting pencil, the decision made. He would enter the competition. Alistair settled onto the armchair, beginning a slow, triumphant purr that seemed to resonate with the hum of renewed purpose in Elias's quiet apartment. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of blueprints, historical research, and sleepless nights fueled by caffeine and an almost obsessive determination. The apartment, once a haven of calm, transformed into a war room of design. Yet, despite the chaos of architectural models and scattered sketches, a strange sense of peace settled over Elias. He had made his choice, and the paralysis of indecision had been replaced by focused energy. Alistair remained a constant, silent presence. He no longer needed to offer cryptic counsel. Instead, he became the project's quiet guardian, his black silhouette a familiar fixture on the edge of the drafting table. Sometimes, when Elias hit a wall, a structural problem he couldn't resolve or a design element that felt soulless, he would absent-mindedly run his fingers through Alistair's impossibly soft fur. In those moments, the tension seemed to melt away, and clarity would often strike. It was a superstition Elias embraced. The cat was his muse. The submission deadline arrived. Elias packaged his final designs, a bold, contemporary vision that honored the district's history while utilizing cutting-edge sustainable materials. It felt right, a perfect blend of Elias's meticulous style and the mysterious boldness Alistair had encouraged. 2 months later, the call came. Elias had been selected as one of the 3 finalists. The final phase of the competition required an in-person presentation to the City Planning Commission and the anonymous benefactor funding the project. A trip across the country to the historical city was required. Elias packed a small suitcase. As he zipped it shut, Alistair jumped onto the bed, staring pointedly at the empty space beside the packed clothes. "No, Alistair," Elias said with a slight laugh. "You can't come. It's a professional presentation, not a field trip for a magical feline advisor." Alistair blinked slowly. Then, in a rare, deliberate act of defiance, the cat turned and vaulted into Elias's open briefcase, curling himself into a tight, dark ball among the presentation binders and the laptop. A low, determined purr started up. Elias sighed, knowing he was beaten. The cat was an untidy variable he had learned to trust implicitly. He re-zipped the briefcase, making a small air hole and hoping the officials at security didn't ask too many questions about the strange, heavy lump in his carry-on. The silent guardian was accompanying him into the heart of the storm, whether Elias liked it or not. The final phase had begun, and Alistair, it seemed, intended to see the prophecy of the bold artisan through to the end. The flight was a blur of anxiety for Elias, punctuated only by the occasional shift of the heavy briefcase resting beneath the seat in front of him. When they arrived at the historical city, a place steeped in atmosphere and tradition, he took a cab directly to the hotel, relieved to let Alistair out of his cramped, dark hiding spot. The cat stretched, unbothered by the transatlantic journey, and immediately inspected the room's high windows. The presentation the next morning was held in the City Planning Commission's boardroom, a cavernous room of dark mahogany and high-backed leather chairs. The 2 other finalists presented first. Their designs were safe, reverent of history to the point of stagnation. As Elias waited his turn, he felt a wave of self-doubt wash over him as he was called up. As he opened his presentation binders on the easel, a ripple went through the room. Alistair, silent and unseen until that moment, leaped from the briefcase onto the commission table, landing with an almost theatrical lack of sound right in front of the chairman. The room froze in stunned silence. Before security could react, Alistair padded the length of the table and sat directly beside Elias's architectural model, his mismatched eyes sweeping over the stern faces of the commissioners. Elias saw the anonymous benefactor seated in the corner, a striking, silver-haired woman who had remained impassive throughout the other presentations. A faint, knowing smile played on her lips as she watched the black cat. "This is Alistair," Elias began, deciding in a heartbeat to embrace the chaos. "And he is my primary consultant on bold designs." A slight chuckle broke the tension. Elias began his presentation. He spoke with a conviction he hadn't known he possessed, describing a future that respected the past but refused to be shackled by it. He didn't just propose buildings. He proposed life, energy, a weaver's ability to use shifting threads to create something enduring and beautiful. When he finished, the silence was different this time, thoughtful, weighty. The silver-haired benefactor rose and approached the table. She looked not at the blueprints, but at Alistair, who stood and rubbed his head against Elias's hand. The young artisan in the tale understood that a true masterpiece requires risk, she said, her voice clear and resonant. She turned her gaze to Elias. Your design, Mr. Elias, is a masterpiece. The project is yours. Back in his apartment a week later, Elias was busy fielding calls and preparing to relocate his life and his business. Alistair was perched on his favorite armchair, the picture of serene satisfaction. Elias paused, looking at his silent partner. You knew, didn't you? All along. Alistair simply blinked, the amber and blue eyes flashing in the afternoon light. He then stretched languidly, jumped down, and disappeared into the shadows of the hallway, a mysterious guardian whose work was seemingly done. Elias was no longer a man of quiet, predictable habits. He was a man about to change a city, guided by intuition, courage, and a black cat who was perhaps, just perhaps, something much more than a cat.